We began that night by looking at the current situation in a typical Church of Scotland congregation. And we observed that we segregate by age. With the exception of the occasional family service, we typically divide our worship into a time for children and a time for adults, with children and young people usually leaving worship to attend a Sunday school or similar. Secondly, our activities for children tend to follow an educational model focused on teaching and learning. We also considered how that educational approach emphasises the generational divide, in that the relationships between adults and children are usually one-directional, taking the form of teacher-pupil or leader-participant. And then finally, we spoke about how relationships so often come with an end in mind, with a so that attached to them. We build relationships so that children will believe certain things or behave in certain ways. And then we finished that evening by looking at a case for the church moving in these 4 areas. The first and the overarching movement is from segregating by age to being intergenerational by default. We should do everything with everyone together unless there's a really important reason not to. And then the 3 further movements follow from that. Our educational mindset needs to move towards an experiential mindset, where all ages can together experience the presence of God. And we explored last time the importance of including different styles in worship as one step towards this. From one-directional relationships to relationships of mutual place sharing was the second movement, where all ages relate to one another as family, being actively for each other as well as just with each other in the same space. We looked at rediscovering informal ways of learning from one another, rather than formal scholastic learning. And then finally, our relationships used for influence need to become relationships that are about revelation. We need to remove the so that from our relating to one another and recognize that Christ is present in our relationships. The relationship is therefore not a means to an end, but an end as itself. And I mentioned last time the importance of practices like hospitality in enabling this. So tonight we're going to explore putting this into practice. And we spoke last time about the importance of sharing our stories, and that's what tonight is about. Looking at these last 3 topics, from educational to experiential, from one-directional relationships to mutual place sharing, and from relationships used for influence to relationships as revelation, with that overarching theme of moving from age segregated to intergenerational, we're going to share stories with one another. And we'll do that in 2 ways. Firstly, on each topic, we will begin by hearing the stories of 3 very different people from 3 very different contexts in the church. I'm joined by Roddy Hamilton, who is the minister of New Kilpatrick Parish Church, by Michelle Brown, who is family worker at Portobello and Joppa Parish Church and a trainer for Godly Play Scotland, and by Jen Robertson, an elder at Burnside Blair Beth Parish Church and Children's Resources Manager for the Scottish Bible Society. And then after we've talked to one another for about 10 minutes, you'll then be moved into a small breakout room to share your own stories and ideas with one another on that topic. So our first conversation tonight focuses on making the move from an educational mindset to an experiential one. As part of the Reformed tradition, the Church of Scotland has traditionally placed a great emphasis on education. But in the last century or so, in some ways, this has come to define our gathered time together. The proclamation of the word we call teaching. Our groups for children we call Sunday school. Ministers of word and sacrament are teaching elders. And in that first webinar, we looked at how we need to move away from seeing church as an educational event, which is not to say that learning doesn't take place, but rather to see gathered worship as a spiritual event, a space and time in which we encounter and experience the living God. So, Roddy, I wonder if you would kick us off on that one. How can we see worship differently as a spiritual experience rather than an educational process?
Well, just say I am no expert in this, okay? And I think all of us will agree. All I can do is share some experiences and thoughts from where I've been and come from, and possibly even going. But the radical bit would be to reshape everything physically in a space where you worship, so that it's more engaging, it's more community orientated, it's less shaped around teaching, because we know the worship space is set up for a lecture, and that's what we do. And so we've created worship that is all about teaching. We do Bible studies from the pulpit, etc. There's other places for that. Find the words that actually engage, the activities, the symbols. Don't be scared to not be in charge. So maybe I wonder if we would allow ministers or worship leaders, not ministers, but worship leaders, to become curators of the space and enable people to use all the senses that we've got, rather than the one that we use in worship, which is hearing, sometimes seeing, but not really, and use all our senses beyond just listening, where we can use other things other than words. There's kind of dare to use elements like symbols and activities and action responses that different cultures and different backgrounds engage and understand in different ways. A very quick story is in a previous congregation, it was Remembrance Sunday. It was always a really important Sunday. And so I didn't really know what to do in my first year there. I knew the BB were there, the guides were there, the brownies were there, etc., etc. And how are you going to do remembrance on a day like that? Do you preach about it, or do you just engage the space? So what we invited people to do was we created this, it's an old idea, but we created a kind of Oasis cross, and the young folk were all sitting in the front pews. And so I said, we're going to play a song that was in the charts at that point in time. It was the Eurythmics, I Saved the World Today. The organists were going to play that. And while that's been played, I'm going to invite you just to come forward and place your poppy in the cross. And I was just talking to young folk, and the scouts and guides don't wear poppies on the uniform. So I had a bowl there. I said, I've got a bowl for everyone here who's not wearing a poppy today. So the organist, the musician, started playing the piece. I bent down to get this bowl, stood up, and in that time, the whole aisle was just filled with adults. And it took the organist, they played I Saved the World Today 16 times before everyone was able to come forward and put their poppy in the cross. That's, so there was no words involved with that at all. It was just creating a space that allowed people to engage in their own way, rather than telling people what to think about it. It was just an opportunity for people to respond in their own way. And I asked the one lady who sat at the back of the church, who always wore a hat and never moved, but she was the front of the line that day. And I asked her why she didn't. It's the first time I've ever been able to respond in my own way to remembrance. So it's taking these big festivals, these big moments, and allowing people to respond creatively with symbol, with music, etc. I mean, there's a million other examples, but maybe that's for later.
Michelle, Roddy spoke there about using the space. You've got some experience of taking worship outdoors. What difference can a real change of space like that make?
Absolutely. Our messy church will quite often go and use the spaces outside to expand upon the stories that we're working with. So for instance, we live right by the beach in Portobello. And so when we were doing the story of Jesus appearing to the disciples for breakfast at the Easter appearances, we went up to the beach and we had a campfire. And we passed around bread, and we had our toes in the sand, and we listened to the waves and listened to the crackling of the fire and tasted the bread, and we're community together as we heard the story together and worshipped up there. And so it was completely being immersed in that space and immersed in the story together. And another time we were outside learning about creation and digging in a church allotment and creating space there to grow things together that we could use for meals for our messy church. So certainly messy church has done that quite often. The church congregation on a Sunday has done that Easter Sunday sunrise service. We've gone up to the beach and had our sunrise service there, and worshipped ecumenically with other churches in Portobello, and again had communion at the beach before coming back up for breakfast. But in that time, it's very intergenerational, because the youth group has stayed up all night for Easter Vigil, and they're all there with us, and children and pets are running about the beach, and it's all ages and everyone really immersed in this time together. And in all those experiences, I've found that we're more authentically able to relate to each other and connect to each other, because we're not stuck in a pew facing forward. We're actually out and about and moving around. And another time that our Sunday congregation managed that was our 10-year anniversary for Messy Church, which coincided with our 5-year anniversary as Portobello and Joppa Parish Church. We'd merged 5 years previously from 3 Church Scotland churches. And we decided to turn the Sunday service up over and do it in the style of Messy Church. And so we canceled our 2 regular Sunday services, and we brought our Messy Church congregation over to that service as well, and had one big Messy celebration for both anniversaries, and where we gathered for a celebration in the church to begin with, and then went out to the halls and the grounds and had like 14 different activities on the go, and all different styles of, craft and baking and gardening and science experiments, and you name it, it was happening, sort of thing. And everyone mixing about. And some folks stayed into the church to listen to a sermon, but most people went to the halls to go and experience everything. And then we finished with a meal together. And it's when we were able to move around and sit at craft tables together and have a conversation over a meal that relationships and connection were happening a bit more so than if we'd been sitting in the pew for a traditional Sunday services.
I mean, listening to what you've both said there, it sounds like the things that were that maybe were imagined to help children and young people engage actually helped all ages engage much more fully in the experience. Mm-hmm. Does that resonate with your experience too, Jen?
Yes, absolutely. And I think what Roddy and Michelle have said, they didn't actually say it, but it was behind what they said, that words really matter. And I think we've come from a tradition of saying, this is for the children. And as soon as you say that, well, the whole bunch of people who are in that space are going to feel, oh, well, this isn't for me, or the opposite. If you give the impression that's for older people, then children feel it's not for them. Now, the beautiful stories that Michelle told there, I could resonate with about our Messy Church and the things we've done in the past, but at the moment that feels very much in the past. But because we're in an online context, or we're connecting with families in all ages in their homes, but I think the language still matters. And if we're going to take something away from tonight, even if we're doing online services, how we speak about the slots we have, whether in a Zoom call or something that's recorded, don't use the words, this is just for the children, or now it's for the children, because you will bring people in and they'll connect with God because we all connect with God in different ways. Not just if you're 8, it doesn't mean that you connect with play. If you're 70, it doesn't mean you connect by listening. It's not to do with our age, it's to do with what kind of people we are. So we need to give a wide variety of ways for people to connect with God.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really what you're saying, Jen, is I think I used, when we did that remembrance thing, I did say, I remember saying, this is just for the young folk. And I've never used that since, because you realise that people just ignored that instruction, thankfully. Yeah. But it's a big lesson about the language, how we describe things. Children's addresses you turn into, it's conversations, and not even all age conversations, just conversations, because all age has this implication it's for young folk as well. Or we're meant to dumb ourselves down. That's right. For all age. So don't use all age. It's intergenerational, if anything, but it's a conversation, etc.
Yeah, and I think everything that we've talked about is about creating spaces. Now, I'm not here to plug Scottish Bible Society resources, but we have Wonder Walks at the moment. If you haven't heard about them, look out for them. But we're doing Wonder Walks as a congregation at the moment. And I walked with a family on Sunday, one adult and me, so it was all safe within COVID regulations, and 2 children. I know, and the children engaged, and we had conversations about what it meant to follow Jesus. And then the children were drawing love hearts in the sand about God's word to Jesus when he was baptized. And then I had a conversation with the other adult about where she was with God and our struggle she was going through. Now, all those conversations were important and relevant, but all we did was create a space by going for a walk and talking about God and reading a wee bit of the Bible. And we can still do that, and families can do that. So we are in a challenging time about how we create those spaces when we're in lockdown, but I think it's still possible. It just might look very different.
It feels like as things begin opening up again, we've got an opportunity as a church not to just go back to how things were, but to think about what we do. So if I'm in a church which has always followed a very traditional pattern, how do I go about making a start at some of this? Where do I begin?
You should let us know when you find out. we've been talking about this because it is really vital about managing expectations when people go back. And the day we go back, let's stop talking about going back, because talking of going back means that we're going back to what it was. You know, when we open the sanctuary, one of the things we're talking about is we've never used IT stuff in our sanctuary at all. Really, it's not designed for that at all, and people would be really upset if you put screens up and all the rest of it. However, there are ways of doing that, and it's a way of people who are still at home on Zoom can still be part of the service. I think that's one of the big lessons we're going to try. As soon as you change the space by doing something as small as that, the formality changes. And when you've allowed people to be less formal, or their expectations have been not reduced, have changed, then a whole lot of options are then open. And it's just creating the invitation, a subtle way of creating a change the shape of the space subtly by putting a screen up so that a Zoom, you can see people in the sanctuary and those at home. That suddenly changes how the conversation goes and how you have to react as a worship leader to that. And that's maybe one option that we're going to try anyway.
Thank you. We've reached the end of our first little conversation, and we'll continue in about a quarter of an hour from now. But now it's over to you to share your stories and your thoughts and your ideas with one another. You might find it helpful to have a question in mind in your small groups. So thinking of your current worship pattern, what small changes could you make to enable all ages to engage more fully in the whole experience?